everyone. Hey, I'm really glad that you're here. If you're a guest this morning visiting with us, I'm super glad that you're here to worship and to learn together alongside of us. As a church, it's our vision to connect people to Jesus and love our community. A couple ways that I'm really excited for today for us to connect to Jesus is tonight kicks off our life groups. Also, all of our kids programming, student ministry, it all launches tonight. So if you have a kid or a grandkid, junior high, high school, all ages, be here tonight. Part of us connecting with Jesus, though, is sometimes asking the hard questions. And I'm not talking about hard questions about situations in life, but hard questions about life itself. Like, where does life come from? I mean, ultimately, our goal as Jesus people is learning to follow Jesus. It's not that we have a faith without a backbone. It's not that we just have something, that we hold on to when life's not going right that makes us feel better. The goal of being a Jesus follower is to understand and to have a strong foundation that we stand on. Today we're launching this new series called The Problem of God. And over the next several weeks, we're going to look at several different things that people say, this is the problem of me believing in God. This is the problem of me understanding God. And I'm going to be real honest with you right up front, that this has kicked my tail all week. Not do I believe it or not believe it, but how do we take facts and reasoning and all of this math that kind of proves something and bring it down into the reality of where we live? Because A, I'm not a scientist, and B, I'm certainly not a mathematician. But more than that, the honesty is that when it comes to giving faith, or when it comes to giving evidence of something we can't see, it's challenging, isn't it? In order for us to build a strong foundation, for us to build something that we can stand on, we come from different places, don't we? Like some of us right now, we're asking questions. We don't know why we believe in God. We don't know if we believe in God. We're not even sure why we're here, other than maybe someone drug us here, right? There's others of us that we have held on to this faith since we were a child. Our parents believed it, they handed it off to us, and we have not let go. But if really pushed and asked the question, well, why do you believe what you believe? How do you know this is true? For a lot of us, we would fall short on answers, wouldn't we? We probably wouldn't be able to come up with much. Well, I just always have. Which is not much to stand on. And I understand that boat because that's where I've been. I mean, that's kind of where I grew up. My parents had a faith and handed it off to me. Someplace along the way, I had to decide, is this really true? You see, but here's what I found. Is when we can begin to look at some of the evidence, when we can begin to look at and investigate some essential beliefs of Christianity, it's not just that it makes us feel better, and it's not just that it makes us feel more educated, because that's not our goal. But when we begin to believe and understand and reason together, it brings greater value and truth to our faith. Like when we begin to be able to have something to stand on other than just, they said so, it brings more confidence to both the trials and the joys. This morning, though, we're going to start from kind of what I'm calling the top. Before we can, have hope in God, before we can have hope that He will lead us through the trials of life, before we can, find forgiveness in Him, we have to answer the question, how do we know really? How do we really know that God exists in the first place? I want to pray. We're going to answer that question. God, I'm so thankful this morning. I'm thankful for this room. I'm thankful for this church. God, I'm thankful that we come here right now from all different perspectives of life, and we may have grown up with some reasoning. God, right now, some of us, we're not sure what reasoning we have. God, we don't know if you exist. God, some of us are fully confident that you do. But God, no matter where we're at on this spectrum, and you know where we're at, I pray that as we have this conversation, that you will help our minds to reach that far. That you'll help our hearts to engage, not just in this moment to gain understanding, but God, to shape the way that we live moving ahead. Father, I pray this morning that we recognize that we're able to be here right now together as your church because of what Jesus did on the cross. We're able to celebrate, we're able to learn, we're able to live with grace because of the hope that you give us on the cross. It's in your name we pray. Amen. There are a lot of different reasons as far as where the world came from. There's a lot of different arguments as far as when it comes to philosophy, when it comes to science, that God doesn't exist. But on the other side, there's a lot of also understanding and reasoning of how God does exist. And this morning, I want us to spend a few minutes just hitting on kind of two of the major punch points of how we know that God does exist. Well, several years ago, I was driving from Buffalo, New York, over to Michigan. The quickest way when you're going from New York to Michigan is through Canada. I had never driven that route before. It was me and Reagan and Levi. We had went up to Buffalo to surprise my mom, and we were coming back to meet Emily in Michigan. And so we were driving this route, and everything was going good. We stopped for lunch. We ate lunch together. Everything was good. And I knew that at some point for us to go from Canada into Michigan, there has to be some sort of border crossing. There has to be some sort of bridge. There has to be some way that we're going to leave Canada and go into Michigan. Growing up in Buffalo, I knew there was a river. You have to cross the bridge. You have to get there. And so the idea was foreign to me, no pun intended. But I knew that I was going to have to cross something in order to get there. And so I did not know what that was until I came around this bend. And when I came around this bend, I looked, and in front of me was a bridge that was so tall, I think it reached up into heaven and came back down. Like the peak of it, I think, was streets of gold, and then it came back down. Like it was so high, looking at it, and I thought to myself, what am I going to do? Obviously, Reagan and Levi are not going to drive. Emily's not here, and for me to reach my destination, I have to cross this bridge. And so we pull up to the bridge, and I'm already nervous. I mean, normally bridges don't bother me, but this one it just seems so high. And so I look, and the bridge is 3 lanes wide. One has a big X over it, which means that's the oncoming traffic. That's obviously not an option for crossing the bridge. And then there's then there's 2 lanes that have green arrows. One, the middle lane, is a green arrow, and next to it, it says trucks. And then the 3rd lane, right next to the edge of the bridge, it has a green arrow and it says cars. And as I am looking at these arrows, I'm also having to slow up because the car lane is backed all the way over the bridge to the other side. And here's what I knew. There is no way that I can stop and go all the way across this bridge. Like, it cannot happen. And I knew I am in a car. I'm not a truck. I'm not pulling anything. There's nothing behind me. I am not a truck. I'm fully a car. And as I sat there and I looked and I weighed those options, I thought, all right, it's time to become a truck. And I moved over and I flew across the bridge. And I passed all of these cars patiently waiting their turn. And I knew the whole time that I was crossing the bridge in the truck lane, I'm in the wrong. I crossed all the way over, and then right about the part where the normal truck lane goes to the truck customs, and the car lane goes to the car customs, what did I have to do? I had to merge back in, didn't I? And I thought everything was great. You know who did not think that? The gentleman in the car behind me that I cut off in order to merge into traffic. He started waving at me with not all of his fingers. He had choice words that I could hear through 2 different cars. He was not pleased with me at all, and he's waving his arms, and I kind of just waved with all my fingers, don't worry. I waved, and I merged back in, and I just kept going. I did not look in my rearview mirror anymore. He knew that I was in the wrong, and I knew that I was in the wrong. But here's my question. Who taught us that that was wrong? Like, as I sat through driving school, I never learned, that this particular situation was wrong. I just knew it was wrong. Who taught us that it was wrong? If this is just me being honest, if you want to see my New York road rage skyrocket, Emily's learned this. But when we're traveling, if you're driving, okay, hypothetical situation, if we're driving next to each other, okay, and all of a sudden you start seeing construction signs that says, merge right, lane ends. Now there's some of us in the room that we understand that the sign needs to actually change lanes. And we change lanes, which keeps traffic moving at a normal pace. There's others of us in the room, and I love you, but you irritate me on the road, that you gun it until you're about to run into a cone, and then you fly over, right? Like, there's different ones of us in the room, okay? And I know, but as I've been sitting and waiting, if you're the guy that comes flying up like you can't read, and then merges in, my blood pressure goes real quick, real high. Why? I mean, no one was sitting there explaining the rules to us. No one was sitting there explaining what was right and what was wrong. But there's this frustration that somebody did it wrong. And where did that come from? Who taught us what was right and what was wrong? Maybe to take it a little bit further, maybe it's not just cutting someone off in traffic. Who taught us that murder was wrong? Who taught us that rape was wrong? Who taught us that killing or beating innocent children is wrong? Nobody. Nobody. We just know that it's right and it's wrong. And here's what Paul writes. In Romans chapter 2, Paul is writing to this church, and he begins in verse 14 and says this, "Indeed, when Gentiles, who do not have the law, do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, and their conscience also bears witness. And their thoughts, sometimes accusing them, and at other times defending them." You see, right and wrong is knit into us. Right and wrong is not taught. I mean, there are parts of right and wrong that are taught, but not everything of right and wrong and morality is written, is defined and taught to us. Some of it is knit into us. The morality that is in our being points to that there is a creator that created our being. The evolutionists on the other side of this argument, they would say that right and wrong came from adaptations and choices made from survival. Okay, and if that's the case, that choices over billions and billions of years formed this idea within us of what is right and wrong, then we would all have the same idea of what is right and wrong. Here's where this falls apart. Okay? To bring this a little bit more into our context, we are nearing closer to deer season. Okay? Let's say you're out in the woods. If you're not a deer hunter, you'll still understand. Let's say you're out in the woods and you stumble across a deer carcass that obviously has been torn apart by coyotes and a bobcat. Now, as a deer hunter, if you're a deer hunter, you might be disappointed by the fact that the deer died. But here's what probably none of us are going to do. None of us are going to look down at that deer carcass and say, it's time to figure out which coyote committed murder. Right? Like, we're not going to look at that deer carcass and say, all right, I got to start looking for footprints and match those against coyotes on the land, and I got to start looking for the fur of the bobcat because I have to prove murder. Right? But we would not look at the situation and begin to investigate murder. We would say, well, that's just part of the animal kingdom. At the same time, and not to be crass, but to the point of what we're talking about. If you're a deer hunter and you're sitting in the deer stand in the middle of the rut, which is mating season for our non-deer hunters, and you look over and there's a buck that is chasing the doe. He has one thing on his mind. He finally catches her. What you're probably not going to do is you're not going to stand up in your deer stand and blow a whistle and say, rape, rape, right? No. Because that's just how their design works. If morality is formed from naturalistic choices that is made over time, then there's no way that animals in this situation, and humans in our situation, we would be able to talk about the same situation with different outcomes. You know what it points to? It points to a more intricate design that was knit in our being from the very beginning. It points to the existence of a creator. The moral compass of you and me points to the existence of God creating inside of us right and wrong. And if God knit it inside of us, if he wrote it on our insides, then it's fine over here for the ends. But it's much different within our understanding. You see, the morality that Paul talks about, of right and wrong, and bearing witness to it being on our insides, not just what's around us, it points to a creator. Morality, it points to the existence of God. The second major umbrella that I want to point at this morning is the universe around us. You probably didn't think when you got ready this morning, you know what's going to happen at church today? I'm going to play poker with my preacher. But here we go. Let's say we sit down, okay, and you and I, we're going to play a hand of poker, okay? And I begin to deal out the cards, or someone begins to deal out the cards. We're wondering what's going to come from our hand. We deal these cards out, and we begin to look, and we say, I didn't get much of anything. This is you. I didn't get much of anything. I've got a 10 high right here. We're not rocking a great hand. But then I look at my cards, and of course, keeping my poker face, I look at my cards, and I have a royal flush. Now, of course, my face is staying straight. I'm not smiling or anything like that. Most likely, I'm going to win this hand, right? Yes. Okay? Most likely, I'm going to win this hand. Okay? And so, yeah, first hand, I win that one. We deal it out again. We're going to go round two. Say, you know what? Lucky you. We look at the cards. Well, this time you got a little bit better. Instead of a 10 high, you got a jack high. But then I look at my cards. What do you know? A royal flush. Now it's becoming just a little bit more comical, isn't it? And let's say that we sit there for a couple of hours. And every time we deal the cards, you get trash. And I get a royal flush. After about 3 hands, what are you calling me? Call it out loud. A cheater. That's right. There is no way that this could be the case. There's no way that you are getting a royal flush every single hand. It's not probable. It's not likely. You would have had to cheat in order for that to be true. And I would agree with you. The same probability, and I don't want to lose you in math because I'm not good at it. The same probability of me getting a royal flush with us playing poker, multiple hands, multiple hours a day for every single day of our life is the same probability of the Big Bang actually starting this universe. It's miraculous, almost more miraculous than a God creating it. When you begin to look at the evidence of the universe around us, yeah, maybe a couple of hands of cards, maybe you really lucked out on that one, but hand over hand, over hand, over hand, days on end, hours on end, you'd say there is no possible way. But if we were to believe and grasp hold of the Big Bang concept, which means that there was nothing and all of a sudden all of these different processes came together and ran into each other and all of a sudden the world began to form. It's the same mathematical probability of the royal flush over and over and over again. Paul, in the same letter to the Romans, he writes these words in chapter 1. He says, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power, his divine nature, has been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. See, there's this idea that God created the universe, which we read in the beginning of Genesis, or there's this idea where it came from nothing. When I was studying this week, I came across an illustration that in order for all of these different scientific parts to all align, it would be like us having an oven that's as big as this stage. And on the front of the oven, there would be 122 knobs. In order for, all of those knobs would represent a different part of science that would have to be aligned. Here's how detailed they would have to be aligned. They would have to be detailed down to the millionth detail, each one at the exact same time. Otherwise, all of those laws of science and all of those parts coming together, the Big Bang would have imploded on itself and burned out. The intricacies of the universe, it takes more faith to believe that it came from nothing than it came from someone. I know that there's a lot of us that have been married in the room longer than I have. But here's what I've learned, okay? And husbands in the room, I need your participation on this, okay? So get your arm ready. How many of us, okay, if your wife walks into the house and you can tell that she's a little bit frustrated, you can tell that she is upset, you can tell that just something is not right, and you kindly look at her and say, "What's the matter?" And her response is, "Nothing." Now, how many of us actually think it's nothing? Exactly. Not many of us, and those that raise their hand are trying to suck up to our wife right now, all right? And not many of us, because we know that it's not nothing, it's something. There's something that is happening. There's something that is causing the emotions. It's a warning sign. Tread lightly, speak kindly. It's not nothing, because we know that nothing does not create everything. From nothing, we cannot find everything. Scientists have said about the Big Bang, where everything came from nothing, that the Big Bang cries out for divine understanding. Stephen Hawking, a very popular scientist who has held to these theories for years and years and years, he says the odds of the Big Bang point to religious implications. You see, it's not nothing. It's someone. You see, when we look at everything around us, nothing does not begin to explain the complexities of God. But the stars in the sky and the mountains and the galaxies, they give evidence to a creator. And when you begin to study the science and the details all behind those, they don't point more towards science, they point more towards God. You see, here's our truth for this morning. That God's existence brings value to our reality. God's existence brings value to our reality. Because here's the truth. If God exists, if I look at the morality that's inside of me of understanding good and bad, if I begin to look at that and it points towards a God who exists and who is real, if I begin to look at the complexities of the universe and the complexities of the human mind and the detail of each DNA strand, it points towards a creator. And when God exists, all of a sudden now there is value to your life and mine. If we were just here and God did not exist and all these things ran into each other and animals and we came from animals and they made choices and now that defines us, what is the value of our life right now? What's the point? Nothing. There's no value other than maybe a good time or friendships, but knowing that they all end and then that's the end. There's no value within that. But when we begin to understand that, no, God does exist, that means that you and I, we were created for a purpose. That means that really we weren't knit together in our mother's womb because God exists and did the knitting. It means that really we were fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of the God that exists when he created us. And no longer are we just here by accident of everything running into each other, but now someone placed us here. And the reality of our life, no matter how good or bad right now, it has value because God has placed us here. When God exists in our life, there is value to the reality that we are in right now. And it's not an accident. Because we are not accidents. We're valuable children of God. You see, when God exists in our lives, then all of a sudden, it's not just value of the reality right now. It's the understanding that if God exists, then he really did send his son to a cross for you and me. To where our reality right now has the hope of heaven and now has the hope of grace. God doesn't exist. Then what's the point? You see, there's value when God begins to exist in our life. And as we look at the evidence, not just because mom and dad said, or not just because grandma said, or not just because a friend invited us and they said, but when we begin to look at the evidence, it points towards a God that exists. And when we see a God that exists, he points back at us and he says, you have value. I made you for a purpose. You're a part of my plan. If my kids, especially Reagan and Levi, because they're a little bit older, if they come up to me and they say, Dad, why am I a part of this family? And I look back at them and I say, I don't know. You're here. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's not so good. You're just here. What's the point? But if my kids come up to me and they ask, Dad, why am I a part of this family? And I look at them and I say, because you are meant to be a part of this family. Because I love you more than anything else. And I'm so glad that you are a part of our family. That you are a part of our family because it's supposed to be that way. They no longer walk away defeated or left with more questions. They walk away valued because they know they have a place. And friends, this morning when God begins to exist in our life, you and I, we have value because we have a place. The place is together. The place is right here. And the place is out there. God has placed us where we are at to bring value to our reality. Not that it's just by chance, because if it's by chance, it's empty. But because he made us, he designed us. And because of his existence, today, there is value to whatever your reality looks like. Because God's existence brings value to our reality. Let's go ahead and stand together. You see, really, the question isn't, is there evidence that proves to the existence of God? Really, the question is, do I want to believe in the existence of God? Do I want to believe the evidence that points to a creator and shape my life around that evidence? It's not that there's not evidence that points to it. It's there. It's, do I want to hold that value in my life? Do I want to define my life by God's existence? Knowing that he made me and designed me. Knowing that he placed me for a purpose. Knowing that I have value in his eyes. It's not that there's not evidence. It's that we don't want to choose to follow it. We try to define our value based off of our career or the finances that we have or our kids' talent or where we work or all of these other things. We try to define our own value instead of seeing the value that God brings to our life because his existence from the very beginning. That the details of our life and the complexities of our mind and our makeup are not an accident. But they were scripted. They were planned out for a very purpose. God's existence brings value to our reality. This morning, where is it in our life that we're not accepting his value? Because we're trying to define it on our own. This morning, where is it that there are facts that point to the Creator we just don't want to choose to follow? Because of the accountability it might bring. Because of the change in our life it might bring. Because of the sacrifice it might bring. This morning, is it that there's not evidence? Or this morning as we worship, is it that we're not choosing to follow it? This morning, your existence right now, it's here for a purpose. You have value right where you're standing, no matter what reality swirls around you. You have value this morning because God knit you together and placed you here right now. Let's sing.